All right, I have 1 minute after 5. Let's rise and say the pledge of allegiance. I call this meeting.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Seated. Call this meeting to order. Thank everybody for braving the cold tundra. Townsend, Alaska. Let's get the minutes from the previous meeting. They were emailed out to everybody. I have printed copies for you too. Once again, stellar record here of the meeting. Thank you, CD. Appreciate that. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion, amendments, corrections? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Minutes pass. All right, we are going to, I'll hand it over here to Mr. Oldham, co-chair, and he can bring in our consultant. We're at this time now where we're starting to lean into the document. So our consultants are busy consulting and doing their business, both groups, and we'll have a really good update from them. I would say as we're moving forward, you'll hear a lot of conversations about updating the document and maps and recommendations to planning and all kinds of stuff. So this should be a really good kickoff going into 2025. So we'll turn it over to Ida.
All right, you all see how you sound.
Right, sure. Can you hear me okay?
You guys hear her out there?
Testing.
Yeah, we're good.
Kelly, can you hear?
Good.
Joseph?
Great.
Excellent. Good evening all. Happy New Year. Hope you're all staying warm and doing well during this cold snap. As Dave shared, we are in the heads down portion, if you will, of our research. We have heard from so many of you all through a variety of different platforms over the last few months. And the key piece I want to share with you today is really a look ahead, what to expect from us over the next 4 or so months. Sharing with you a little more about ATDB's, Kevin and his team's role in this project, really assisting us as a group with a lot of the research, a lot of the verification of what we've heard thus far from you all, and really zooming into an understanding of the 2010 through 2020 planning initiative that has taken place. So as we update that document, we can clearly communicate to you all an understanding, bring data to inform our conversations that we'll continue to have with you all, and then roll that forward as we get into February of this year. So to date, we have completed phase 1 and phase 2 of our process with you all. Again, we are currently in the data analysis section that is being led by Kim and his team. So they've been great to work with thus far, working with his team at Beachhead, as well as bringing in some outside consulting support through University of Tennessee, making sure that we have the most current and most relevant data to inform our understanding of what you all have shared, and then align that with the best of what we have in our research and our understanding as a group, looking at other gateway communities who may be facing similar challenges that you all have brought to us and share that you all are also facing. So that's where we are in the kind of set of work as it stands. What we'll be looking forward to as we move forward, and I'll share that these next 3 slides are shared with me by Kim. He is out of the office this week, so I'm happy to jump in and share his thoughts to the best of my ability. Starting out with just making sure that as we dive into this research section, that you all know that we're doing our work aligned with guiding principles of wanting to be fair, fact-based, do our best as consultants to be unbiased, and make sure that the planning and the research that we are doing on your behalf upholds the community's established vision for what Townsend hopes to be as you move into the future. Through that lens, we'll be looking at zoning ordinances, understanding how residents, businesses, and stakeholders engage, providing opportunities. Again, we'll be providing opportunities for really looking chapter by chapter through the plan and understanding how the regulations and language that are in the plan affect day-to-day operations there at City Hall, as well as throughout the community for residents and businesses alike. There'll be also sections and opportunities to look into regulations, thinking about what it means to live, work, and play in Townsend, and how the city can work together to make sure that there's alignment with the vision and how you live your daily life with the community, as well as looking into the chapter on land use and understanding how research-based understanding of how the land is currently being used, and how we can make sure that the language in the plan is aligned to communicate clearly how decisions that are made today affect the community moving forward into the future. So what I'm sharing here as a visual is maybe familiar to many of you all as the current zoning map and growth boundary that is presented in the existing plan. But I'm sharing it really as a visual and as an example of what you can expect as we move forward in this process, and sharing that over the next 4 months, the community can really expect us, the team, to focus our efforts on data analysis, development of an initial draft plan, which we'll be working hand in hand with the CPAC committee to communicate, walk through, fact check, and really bring what we're looking at with the research perspective to CPAC and to you all to make sure that we're walking, we're not jumping ahead of any point, we're staying aligned with our understanding and your understanding. Some of the initial data that we're receiving from University of Tennessee are similar to this in scope, and we'll be taking this data and working with staff at C Group and ETED as well as University of Tennessee to understand how jobs growth, how population, how understanding children and various factors influence the future of Townsend, and how through planning and ideation we can put into place opportunities for the future of Townsend to look the way your vision has asked it to look, and we can do that through planning. So this is an example of what we can expect as we move to the future. During our December meeting, Kim shared this Gantt chart that's created to really align the pacing that you can expect from us over the next 4 months and what will be produced for you all as part of our deliverables. So as we look ahead to February, you'll see that research has been underway on this document, but really the pace and how we package that to bring to CPAC and to the community will really pick up in pace over the next 3 months. So I'm going to kind of take this meeting to kind of prepare you for what that will look like and communicate how you can stay engaged and involved. One of the biggest ways to do that is through the website. If you haven't been to the website recently, we do continue to update that with what we are producing, what we are hearing, and do our best to make sure that you have access to the resources that we do at any point in time. So I'm calling your attention this time to a direct link to the Land Use and Transportation Plan that was prepared 2009-2010 for use. You're welcome to scan this code or click that link if you'd like to learn more. But want to make sure that you have access to all this data as we continue to lean in. Above that, this kind of graphic that you might see above the link to the Land Use and Transportation Plan. Also, I'll call your attention to that. This document was created by ETED in partnership with the visual team at SE Group as an education document, so to communicate clearly how we as planners are thinking about zoning and planning for the city, and make sure there's opportunities for you to get engaged in that at an early phase. So please do tap into that. Lastly, just a quick update here today. I'll share kind of our next steps. So again, plan development and research underway, led by TDD. As we get into spring and summer of 2025, we'll be bringing on a chapter by chapter basis, understanding recommendations and research to small group working groups, as well as updates at this monthly meeting for the community, and are on track for a midsummer completion of this deliverable. From there, ETED will continue to work with you all and the planning team to move recommendations and opportunities forward into practice. Thanks.
Any questions for Ida from the committee?
I'll always ask one. Ida, the graph that had the population pyramid and the just other information on it, you mentioned that's the sort of information you're pulling from University of Tennessee and ETAD in general. Can you just go over again what that information will be used for? Like how you or a Kim takes that and then applies it to our specific land use and transportation plan?
Great question. So it's a really case-by-case basis as we get to the different chapters of the plan itself. But through the communication and visioning working groups that we've had thus far and information that we've received, we're hearing about the type of community that you will want to live in, want to be a part of. And we want to understand to what extent the city itself can support that vision. And in order to do so, we're flagging an understanding about population is a great example. Right now, there's of course a very strong 55 plus section of the community, which is fantastic. But as we're thinking about how to invite young families into the community in a way that they can afford and participate in the economy on a year-round basis, the data that we're gathering, both quantitatively and qualitatively, really helps us understand that balance and that flow and what we're aiming for in some of our planning and zoning recommendations.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ida from the committee?
Is there a chance we can get a copy of what you just presented?
Absolutely. We'll make that available.
Yes.
Can you specifically, I know you went over it, but since Kim is out of the country, can you specifically mention a few of the conversations, meetings, or kind of synergistic matchups or whatever you guys are doing, Zoom or whatever, over the past 30 days and how you two are working together? Can you summarize that, I guess?
Of course. So Kim and I chat monthly, the beginning of the month, and both share what we have in front of us, any outstanding questions or specifically roadblocks that us and our teams might be facing. But as project managers, scoping out what the previous month has held, what the upcoming month holds, and making sure that we are in line with the initial scope of work as presented, and that our work is complementing each other. So in January so far alone, Kim and I had that standing call, and we also had a good conversation with our GIS staff. So bringing Emily from the ETED staff, as well as Lydia from my team at SE Group, into a meeting to make sure that as GIS mapping is produced for this project, Emily and Lydia have good connections, and we're able to seamlessly share data across platforms. For those of you who worked with GIS, that it takes a little bit of coordination to make sure that mapping can get shared across platforms, in this case 3 different entities. have access to that data as it's updated, and it can be a working document. So putting the systems in place so that as mapping, zoning, and the strategic elements come together, our teams have clear lines of communication. As we get into February, I am looking to Kim to take the lead on this section, and to ensure that my team at Essing Group is in line with budgetary and timeline expectations, and we have the ability to continue to really work hand in hand with you all as recommendations are rolling out. So looking to detail on that, but as we get into the future elements here, we'll be continuing to support Kim and EPDD to walk chapter by chapter through the plan and share those recommendations as research is in place.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open it up just before, while we're on the topic, anybody out, any public would like to ask Ida any questions before we move forward. Okay. All right. Ida, you are welcome to hang on and follow along with us. We're going to move into the next phase of our meeting. But appreciate you staying. Grab your dinner and hang out. I would like to bring in a discussion with the committee and with our mayor of how we're going to transition, where we're at in our transition time as a committee, as we're looking towards the end of this process. I'd like to ask the mayor to start this discussion on how we're going to look at the current land use document that's on the webpage and how that is going to change and work through the processes. So, Mr. Brenner.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and really looking forward to this next stage of the work. As I indicated to you last time, the charge that we have from the Planning Commission is outlined in something called the scoping document. And so I've said it a few times, but I'll just reiterate that our charge is to update the current land use and transportation plan using the existing framework. Now, we've got pretty wide latitude when it comes to that. For example, the phase of the work that we've just completed, the vision statement, I think is really important. So one of the things that I found that was missing from our current land use and transportation plan is a vision for the community. What does the community want in terms of a place to live? And so we've gone through that exercise, and there will be places in our work where we can add things like that. This next phase of the work, I had talked a lot about what ETDD is doing. We've talked a lot about the data, updating the data. And so the land use and transportation plan, I'm going to hold up, this is a printed copy. This is the same thing that's on the website, so everybody's hopefully had a chance to get familiar with it. I don't know, we're almost at the stage where you're going to have to sleep with it under your pillow at night, but to absorb all that's in here. But we are charged with updating some of this, and there's several sections here that are really the data sections. So I thought, at the request of the chairman, what I might do is walk through the current plan and its structure, just so that we can all kind of be on the same page with what's in this plan, and start to highlight some of the things that might be in need of update, some things that might be omitted. The hardest things to find sometimes when you're looking at a large document is what's omitted. People are quick to get in there and start editing line by line, comma by comma on what's in there. But one of the hardest things to do is to take a step back and say, is there something missing here? And so as I walk through this document, I'll share with you some of the things that I see that need to be updated and some things that I think might be omitted. And we've heard some of these things from our communities, that we should always be guided by what we heard from our community in this exercise, all those surveys and what we captured in the vision statement. So if there's things that are in the vision statement that you don't see reflected in this plan, that might be an opportunity, something that we need to consider to put in here. So I know the chairman wants to spend a little time on the executive summary, and maybe in subsequent meetings we'll kind of walk through some of these different sections, so I won't dwell on any particular section. But the first section in this plan is the introduction. It has a lot of what I would consider background information. I read it recently, and most of this stuff is still relevant. Some of it might need a little updating, but in general, I find that this is where the vision statement will be inserted, I would imagine, somewhere in this introduction. So what did we find out from our community? In this introduction, it talks about what the purpose of the plan is. What is Townsend? Where does, what are some of the boundaries? You heard Ida make reference to the urban growth boundary, so that's something that we need to discuss. What was the methodology? So we'll update this with what our methodology has been. Other plans and studies, some of these things are still quite relevant. Some of them may be a little dated. Floods on the Little River, 1960. My guess is weather patterns have changed. Certainly what we saw on the other side of the mountain indicates that we ought to be thinking, maybe outside of some historical parameters. But a lot of these documents are still pretty good. But think about what kind of documents are useful to Townsend that we ought to put in here as ones that help guide our work. And of course, this plan itself will be one of those documents. This is where you see the first instance of the urban growth boundary. So what is that? What is an urban growth boundary? It's not the city limits, but it's sort of the area that we ought to be thinking about. Now I'll tell you, in my read on this, the urban growth boundary has been previously decided, but it's pretty narrow. It's not much more than the city limits. If you look at other communities, sometimes their urban growth boundary is actually quite outside the city limits. And so there are references here. We talk about the Tuckaleechee Cove. About half of it sits on the other side in Sevier County, but we ought to be thinking about what's the right region or what's the right area that we should be looking at. And so there's a lot of maps that are included in here. So what sort of maps will be useful to us? This is the one that was up on the screen with the urban growth boundary. There's a process for establishing the urban growth boundary, and a recommendation might be that we need to look at that. It needs to be bigger, perhaps, than what's in the current plan. The second chapter, and I'll go, I'm not going to spend all this time. You want me to stop?
No, hang on, you're good. I'm just looking right here. It actually says within the 37884 zip code, so.
Okay. Yeah.
Correction duly noted.
Thank you. And so the next chapter here talks about natural features. So this is where we see the air, the water, talks a lot about flooding. This is where the flood regulations come in. Flooding, here's a flood map right here. My guess is if you look at this flood map and think about the rainfall that happened with Hurricane Helene, you will find that there's all kinds of ways you could look at the flood map. This is pretty conservative relative to the rainfall that occurred on the other side of the mountain and caused so much problem. So we need to be real conscious about updating our flood maps, and we also need to look at some of the things that we've seen recently. Another omission here talks about water quality. We've got a water quality study going on. There's not a whole lot here, but water quality is important for our residents, for our visitors alike. But one thing you will not find in this section, and I didn't see it anywhere else, wildfires. So that seems a little bit like an omission there. And relative to wildfires, I just wanted to remind us, somebody might say, well, wildfires, they don't occur that often. We're in a very wet area. It's a temperate rainforest. Well, in 2016, not too far from us, in Gatlinburg and around there was a big wildfire. You all remember this. But here's some of the statistics, 2016. 17,900 acres burned. About 10,000 was in the park, but there's a big chunk outside of that. 14 people died. 2,460 structures destroyed. $2 billion damages. And so if there's anybody that wants to make the case that this couldn't happen to us, I'm happy to listen to it, but I do think wildfires are something that we need to pay attention to because of our surroundings. So that would be the chapter where we would include that type of information. And just for some comparison there, I actually pulled up the same statistics. Effects of Hurricane Helene in North Carolina. 104 fatalities, 26 people still missing, $60 billion in damage. That's just in North Carolina. So floods, I do think floods are probably the main thing, but we also need to consider wildfire, and that would be an example of maybe an omission that we ought to address. In that section 2, it talks about slopes. So I would encourage you to study when you're reviewing that, because slopiness, mountainousness, is a feature of our community as well, and it really means where you can build things. For example, industrial developments are not intended to be built on property that slopes more than about 3%. And if you look at the area of Townsend, we've sort of limited stuff that's not in the floodplain, that's in that 0 to 3%. We need to be familiar with that, but that's the section where that type of information occurs. Next chapter, this again, sort of background, socioeconomic trends. This is where the population data exists. It talks about the census. I was real interested to look at these census numbers. So we've almost doubled in our population since the 2000 census. We had 244 people in 2000. So we've got 553 according to 2020 census data. But this is where that type of information would come. This is all the stuff that ETD is looking at. It also talks about the characteristics of our population. So we talk about children. We want to encourage children and families in Townsend, but the reality is that we have a senior population here. And so being able to characterize the population is an important feature of this work, and it's in this chapter where this goes. It also talks a little bit about some of our businesses and industry. Talks about business permits. This is where the information on employment results. And so we have a labor shortage in Townsend as well. And so that's something that we need to think about, because one of the things that drives that is affordable housing. So it is important. It's more than just important to our businesses because they have to have that labor. But it's important in planning. Telecommunications, I can tell you a lot has happened in telecommunications in Townsend since 2009. And so things like cell towers and things like that, and how do we get communications, Wi-Fi, mesh networks, you've heard me mention that. So that's where all these things occur. Next chapter, land use and transportation inventory analysis. And so this is real interesting. Some of this, I think, has not changed, interestingly enough, very much, but other things have. So this is an inventory. How are we utilizing our available land in Townsend? Certainly needs to be updated, but there's maps and things that you can see that talk about existing land use. Planning Commission recently undertook something called a windshield survey. Part of the impetus for that survey was to look at how land is zoned currently and how it's being used. And so I've made this point a few times. As you drive up and down the road, as our residents drive up and down the road, things look like they're vacant lots. Well, that's a vacant lot, but it's also zone B1. So if tomorrow every parcel that had B1 had a business on it, it would look quite different. But that doesn't mean anything has changed, but it's people's perception of what that is. And so one of the things we'll have to do, and I think why it's valuable, what our consultants are helping us with, is to talk to our community about the planning process. Because we want to not only develop a plan that is based on our community input, but some of that might necessitate how do you get there from here. So we have this. Everybody that's zoned business, nobody's going to want to flag up and say, I want to be zoned something that I think is less, commercial potential, or less, let me say it another way, less valuable. But there has to be a way that you will help people to understand once you coalesce around a vision, how do you get from one place to another?
Mayor, let me ask you a question right there. So, in the inception, I guess the original document was about 1986 or somewhere in the 80s.
1986
Okay.
it was the original
So,
land use transportation.
Our forefathers there basically envisioned Townsend 40-something years later. And I guess that vision was strong in them to say this is business and this is residential. Are we just, I mean, I see this from a personal note as we're the caretakers of this process from the original document. Am I far off from that?
I think that's right. I mean, everything is evolving. We have to remind ourselves we're just working on this as a snapshot in time. So there will be people that will look back on what we did now and think, well, okay, kind of wonder why they did it the way they did it. Hopefully there'll be enough explanation. But things will change. The only thing that's certain is things will change. And so, yes, we need to look ahead and anticipate as much as we can. But I don't know that in 2008 anybody anticipated Airbnb. We thought we knew what a hotel and a motel was, and we knew that tourism is changing and you need different types of accommodations. We had a great discussion at our last planning commission meeting on people wanting to, come and stay in an RV. That's a different experience. And so when people come, I can't remember the wise man that came and talked to us about, motels versus RVs. People want to stay in a variety of different things now. And so the situation is constantly evolving. Airbnb and, residential land use patterns, I don't think anybody thought about that in 2008. So we need to be thinking about that. And 40 years from now, there might be something different that we haven't anticipated. But to the extent that we can, we need to reflect our current realities. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm taking a lot of time. Let me go a little bit more quickly through these other chapters. I just wanted the committee to be familiar with what's in this plan, because as we go through it, this is our task, is to update these things. Let's see, we're still here in transportation, so we need to know traffic counts. This, again, is what EDD is doing. We have one traffic light, and, if you ever envisioned that we might need another one, well, where's that traffic coming from that would necessitate something like that? Here's a little paragraph here, which I think we ought to pay a lot of attention to. Non-automobile circulation patterns. Y'all heard me talk about this. We're long and skinny, but one of the nice things we have is we have a bike path. We've got a sidewalk on the other side. And we talk a lot. Right now, I'll talk during city council meeting tonight about what's happening up there at the upper end. What's all that construction about? But people use these sidewalks, and they're using them in ways that are evolving. So, when people have mobility assists, whether it's a bicycle or a wheelchair or a motorized scooter, people are using our infrastructure in different ways. But if we continue to evolve along this trajectory, being a gateway community, being tourism as one of our primary enterprises, how people move around in our corridor is going to be very important. So I think we ought to give a lot of thought to non-automobile circulation patterns, because if we want people to be able to come and access things here in Townsend, if you just have more and more and more cars, then you have to have more and more places to put them. I don't see cars going out of the business anytime soon. But being able to move around in a way that's not congested necessarily by automobiles could be something very interesting in Townsend. And it might fit with some of the vision and values that we see from our residents. So part of the friction, the pain points that our residents articulate to us are with cars. Where do you park them? How do you make sure you're not in front of them if you're trying to walk down the path or out of your driveway or something like that? So So this is a section that I think that warrants some attention. Next chapter, now, we're starting to get into the sort of what I consider the second part of the plan. First part is data. Second part is what are you doing with that? And so the development plan is really the chapter that talks about all these land use policies. And so the way it's organized is it talks about residential land use policies. So if we were going to talk about, how do you look at neighborhood business districts, or how do you look at overnight rentals, or other things related to residential land use policies, that's what's going to go in this section. And I imagine in our draft it will be a little bit more involved than what's here in these page and a half. Commercial land use policies, we've had a lot of discussion in town about that, trying to look at getting the right uses in the right places so that they can be successful and also be harmonious. Your word, harmonious with the rest of the operation. Public, semi-public, open spaces, recreational land use. Our Parks and Rec Committee has done a great job developing our assets. So that's where this comes into play. Our city park, any other parks that we might want to have, bike trail, how do we manage those things? What do we need to ensure that? This is where the policy part of the document happens. I keep saying section 5. When I say section 5, I think that's the right. This is the section I'm talking about, section 5. Utilities, land use policy. So I mentioned cell towers, and we're getting new power poles and all kinds of stuff. Water, parallel pipe project, things like that. That's where this goes. Transportation policies. These are the actual policies that guide the Planning Commission in their work. And so they are described here, but they're actually implemented by the Planning Commission and by the Board of Commissioners. And that's what's in the next section, section 6, is the implementation plan. And so the implementation plan talks about how do you actually implement these policies. And there has to be a plan for that. There's actually a lot of really good ideas here that are probably still relevant. Some of the data in this land use and transportation plan, it needs to be updated. Some of the things, there's omissions in here, wildfires and home sharing things like Airbnb. But there's a lot of stuff in here. For example, Architectural Review Board is already described here, never been implemented. But if you want a community, we talk a lot about some of these other communities. People ask you, why did you get a consultant that works out in Colorado or Vermont or somewhere like that? Well, they see this stuff in other communities, and it has to be fit for our community, but there are things that we can learn. And architectural review is something that makes a community, particularly small communities, very cohesive in their aesthetic. And people talk about that. I can remember about a year ago, we had a discussion on East Appalachia character. Y'all remember that? Some of you were there for that discussion. Well, what does that mean, East Appalachia character? Has it got stacked stone? Does it have, weatherboard? What does it look like? But the communities that get high marks from people that live there have some cohesion in their aesthetic. There are also communities that get high marks for people that want to visit. And so I think we're fortunate in that our businesses have really kept that spirit largely. We have maybe a few exceptions, but we are very fortunate that the people that have come before us, I'm looking at one of them across the table, has really kept that aesthetic without an architectural review board. But that's something that ought to be, in my mind, considered. And I'm using that as an example because just to say that there's still a lot of really good stuff in here, and we want to keep, good ideas if we think that that's reflective of our community. So I hope that review was somewhat helpful, but I would encourage you to do your homework. I tell our Board of Commissioners, I tell our Planning Commissioners, you must do your homework. Your homework is to get a printed copy, to that's what works for you, to get it on your computer, online, and know this land use and transportation plan, because, and you've probably already done it, I expect you have. But this is what our task is, and we're heads down working on this, and this is really going to be important for the next few months.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to continue that conversation. I had printed out the page for the committee for the executive summary, and I think that had summed up a lot of what you had to say, Mayor. How do we, as a committee, first of all, I see some of us with laptops and some not, and I don't always have mine with this document on it. So do we feel as a committee that it's a need for us to have a printed copy that we can highlight and work through? Something you can kind of pack around? Okay.
I've already printed and I have
Yeah, if any committee members want a printed copy, we'll make sure that you have them. I can't do it for
So do we-
everybody. It is online, so anybody else has to print it themselves, but if committee members need a printed copy, we can.
Well, I was just gonna say, we can find out, have a printed for the committee down in town or something like that, or whatever. I'll just get with Gail.
Anybody needs one, let us know. If you
Okay.
don't already have it downloaded or printed, just let us know.
I'm of the age where I have to have a printed copy and a computer copy, so I have to have them both. But I'm also a highlighter guy too, and that kind of helps. I think in this process of, as we're going through it, to create an importance in this document, or keep it up on top of the desk, shall I say, instead of in a file tucked away in a website, to make it relevant. Like I say, you're just talking about it here now, there's a lot of things in here that are already in here, say an architectural review board, that need to be sitting on top of the table for the city to understand that it can have access to it, and we can use something like that. So I think in this executive summary that I printed out and we handed out to everybody, I think that once again is our charge for what we feel we need to be responsible for, is to make sure that as CPAC, our committee here, that these things are constantly brought out front, vetted out in the community, brought out to the community for that input as we're going through the process. I would like to move forward with the documents on the table every month until we close this committee out and have continued conversations and input with the community, whether it's the businesses that are here or senior advisors or some of the folks that have been around here forever and ever and ever, and even input from our media source over there. I think it's all well and good, and I would like to, I think when now we're seeing the last 6-8 months of this committee, you want to feel that, I want you to feel that responsibility of, we want to turn in the best possible product for the work that's been done. And then, like I said earlier, since, you're standing on the shoulders of the people that built this in 1986 too, on top of that, and make sure that we do all that we possibly can to think far enough into the future, like the mayor said, and capture what we can, but then leave room for, there'll be another generation of towns and folks that will come in and pick it up. I feel a lot of responsibility, a heavy burden here. And I just want to make sure we're going to move forward correctly. So I will get with you, Mayor, or talk with Gail when she gets back in, see if we can get some copies and figure out how to move forward, especially next month, with having these conversations.
So you're talking about, so we just went at a high level through the land use and transportation plan, and, basically, Mayor Don's summary of each section. And so what we're talking about is practically is all of us getting a paper copy, bringing it to every meeting, and like going line by line on here, and
No, not necessarily.
Okay, then what was the practical thing you're asking for? Because I'm a little confused listening to you about like, yes, we need to take this document, but hey, we've also been doing this for 6 months, and like, but also like, how are we going to do it future and this and that? So like, what are you asking us to do?
I want to make sure that when we turn this document in, that the committee is not guilty of not reading this document through, and the committee is not guilty of making sure that the community did not have the ability to work and hear and see what's going on in the process. I'm not saying a line by line. I'm saying more of a responsibility to us to make sure that we're looking at this document in our spare time and reading it and highlighting it and maybe having conversations with the community. Mayor?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chairman, what I've understood you to sort of suggest is that we might, at each meeting, take one or two of these sections and go through it intentionally. It might not take, too much time. If everybody's read it ahead of time, the idea is to go through here, and especially in these first 3 sections, 2, 3, and 4, if there are data points that we need, such as updated flood maps with different rainfall projections, if there's other information, now's the time to ask, because ETDD is putting that together. And so read this section on natural features and be ready to say, this is what I think we need, because these are data that will be important for the different land use policies that are coming up.
So do you guys feel that this is I hear the engaged community, that kind of stuff, but ETDD is doing this side by side, theoretically. They're the ones that are charged with, scrubbing this document, getting it to a point that's updated with all the data sources. And so we're going to be going through, let's just say we just homework, section 2, section 3 for next time, whatever, read it, come with ideas, come with what we need, keep in mind what our vision statement is, all that jazz, right? Like we are, for lack of a better term, duplicating the efforts that SCG and ETDD are doing, so that when we get to May, June, whatever the timeline is, that we kind of have our red line version, and then ETDD and SCG have their red line version, and then we get to like come together, or what's the outcome here that we're looking for?
So I don't see that as much as I see maybe we're jogging along at the same pace they are. What we can do that they can't do is we can have conversations with the community. They are not having those conversations. I want to make sure that this committee is transparent and the mouthpiece into 37882.
I have no idea where ETDD is describing,
So there you go. Yeah, and all we can do is get updates from our consultants. But with this time going into this summer, at least we can become familiar with the document. And as we're getting our monthly or weekly conversations with Ida and Tim, we can say, hey, where are you at? Have you checked this box? Or
Yeah. ETDD, the way to track what they're working on is the Gantt chart. And so that was presented, and ETD has suggested that there might be additional community opportunities that they would engage on. But the chairman's right. This committee and this meeting is the conduit for the community to come in. And so as we're doing that, we're not we're working at the same time, sort of on the same thing. So something that comes up in this venue, we have folks that are engineers and other types of skill sets in our community. Did you think about this? Did you think about that? And so that's where we can sort of double check ourselves to make sure that as they're developing their work, they're answering all those boxes. Because ultimately what will be delivered is there will be an update to Chapter 2. And if it doesn't have something in there about wildfires, I'm going to be pretty worried. But I suspect this is the way, to do that. So I think that's what's being suggested here is that, we sort of go through it at the same time, take community input, Also, ETDD will start to present, I think even next month, they're going to start to present some of that work. So it'll be a little bit more interactive.
Okay, so the way that we're envisioning this in our one-ish hour monthly meetings, or a little more, is that ETD and SCG will have their presentations of sorts. We're going to go through a section or two, hopefully have come prepared with conversation points or whatever, so some sort of homework that needs to be assigned to the committee. And then we are going to have Kim and Ida basically listen to this, or are they going to be engaging with kind of what we do here? And so I asked because we have time with Ida. She's typically not stayed around for meetings. Obviously, stayed around today. So the expectation is that Kim and Ida need to have a full hour allotted to us, if not a little bit more, to talk through it. It means our agenda grows. It just means a lot of change with what we've been doing in these meetings. And so if we have homework and such, I kind of want y'all to define exactly what our homework is for the next meeting so that all of us are ready to go.
I think we should, as best we can, follow the Gantt chart and what's mapped out by month for for the process. So they're working on research data. We need to identify gaps. When they bring us updates, we look through the plan and say, okay, this is what's been updated. Here's what we still need and the deliverables we expect for next month. We're also looking ahead for, okay, the policy section. Like, when do we need to be focused on that? And it will be probably 2-3 months before we're coming together with ideas, changes, and revisions and suggestions, so giving out time for that.
But if they're on an extra 30 minutes with us, obviously the first meeting of this style, like we're having here, is going to be a little lengthy. There's a lot of conversations that needs to take place, but as we have in the past, we've already approved our streamlined processes. We can get this down to 15-20 minutes. Here's what the committee did homework or whatever. This is what we noticed. Committee member, Katie found this or that. And when they're on with us, after they make their presentation of where they're at, they can spend 15-20 minutes listening to us. We can turn that data in. And we're all working cohesively together. I wouldn't call it assignments or homework. I would just call it being a part of this committee.
Okay, so that's a little different than what you just explained though. So that's that. So this is, but what you just said there is that we are now, like, it's not necessarily a discussion then when we're here, but rather we're ready and are coming with ideas.
But it can be discussed. This is the platform to be discussed, so we're doing this in front of the committee.
And, okay, but it's not like we're going through it and say, section 5.1 or section 5.2 and like, hey, let's look at this is the topic here. And so what the expectation is, and so flipping the script from the community out here, is that you guys are following along. Because we're not going to be stopping and spoon feeding paragraph by paragraph, but rather the homework that we have is the homework that you have if you want to stay with us. And I think it's important that we have.
Absolutely.
And so what I'm trying to work to here is that I want to be very clear about what our homework is or what our assignment is to the next meeting, so that everyone here hears that assignment, knows exactly what we're going to be working on next, and can do their version of it and come prepared. Because it sounds like the way our meeting's going to be structured is you're going to have knowledge of what we're talking about before you even get here.
Well, I think, yeah, but at the same point, if somebody just happens to pop in, like the mayor said, there's a lot of people that have certain backgrounds or expertise, not only on the committee, but out in public also. So there's certain things that when you get into, planning or this or that I have no knowledge of. But to bring it up and ask the question, follow along the Gantt chart and just say, hey, here's where our consultants are. This is where we need to at least have our heads wrapped around. Now, whether that's a couple paragraphs here that we can identify before we come into the meeting, maybe it's the email prior with the consultants. This is what we're working on. I just want to make sure at the end of the day, and this committee can come up with the final answer, I want to make sure that we're continuing to be transparent with the community, as well as take great knowledge and input from the folks that live in this area. The other thing too, I think that what we're accomplishing here is the book is going from under the desk to on top of the desk. I think the more we talk about our land use document, the more it will get read, the more it will be referenced moving forward.
I think that's right. My suggestion for February is that we look at section 2 and section 3. Section 4 is a little bit different, so maybe tackle that one in March. And between now and then, take a look at section 2, section 3. They're not long, but identify if there are things that will be needed. Look at the Gantt chart and what ETDD is doing, and identify those things, like we talked about tonight.
Do you think it's beneficial to detail our agenda a little further in the sense of, we talked about section 2 and 3, but do you expect that this committee should be called submitting topics from those sections that should be detailed on the agenda, or do you think that just the topic of section 2 and 3 is enough to go there?
Well, I think we'll have to figure out what works for the committee, but I think this could work. If people look at section 2 and 3 and say, what are the data gaps that we need there, and write those things down, the deliverable from February's meeting will be a list of things. Now, we can't spend the entire meeting doing that, so people have to come pretty quickly, generate that list. ETDD will present what they have, so it might become apparent that they've covered a bunch of those, that's fine. But there might be some that they need to go back and continue to add to. And then we'll see how that works at the next meeting. And if it works, the way you're suggesting, we could try it again with chapter 4 in March. And then chapter 5 really starts to be the land use policies. And so it requires some synthesis of that information. So that one's going to be a little different, but we can start looking ahead. And that's the place, I think as I discussed, if you're going to have a policy that talks about overnight rentals, that's where the policy, now it has to be data driven. And so, you would need to consider the information already, but if we can start thinking ahead. So there's February, March, and April, and I think that fits with the Gantt chart. And so hopefully, folks in the community, they can follow along with us and see, if they have suggestions too.
Well, it makes it a very transparent document. I think that's part of the goal here is to bring this from day one, this process in a very transparent process. With the new vision statement being added and all that work into that front end of the vision statement, which was a very community-driven, the way it came about.
So there may be trends that we may need to anticipate. We may need to engage with the park as well. There's been some discussion, I think, over time about, can you sustainably have, as many millions of visitors a year as comes up to the park all in cars? If they continue to, grow in a certain trajectory that they're on, is it sustainable to have, twice as many millions of cars in and out of the park? And I know that they're thinking about that and what that might look like. And when it comes to the transportation aspect, it would be useful to maybe get some of their input in. And so there's a section in here, as I talked about before, where that kind of stuff belongs. But if that becomes, some model for the future, that would, cause us to think about infrastructure and again, how people, because we are very, very close to the park. If you look at other communities that are at the entrance to national parks, they don't have exactly the proximity. We've got a close proximity. The city limits goes right up to the park. And so we need to be thinking about, what's happening up in the park, because it will directly affect our residents and our citizens and our visitors as well.
All right.
Can I bring up a couple of important things? In the 2006, I was involved. The two things that we forgot creating policy that you can't enforce or implement. And you brought up architectural part. It was discovered that we couldn't do that. We wanted to do that. The other thing is lighting. You can't control it because a large corporation goes in here and puts up their standard light, and Williams do some of them. You couldn't afford it, and that's what happened. So there's lights all down through here that have been put up since 2006, all illegal, as opposed to, you refer back to the policy that was created. And that's the one thing we need to think about is why come up with a policy that you can't enforce? You got to figure out what you can enforce.
That's a good point. Policy development. Policy has to be practical and feasible. And I think that's what you're saying,
Yeah.
Richard. If you develop a policy that's not practical or feasible, there's very slim chance that it will ever be implemented. And so why would you spend your time on that when you might ought to be thinking about what is a policy that could be practical and feasible? Now, the examples that you gave, I think there are ways to be able to do that. Lighting being one of them. That's one that we heard from in our vision statement. We've had heard from our citizens that we ought to take a look at our lighting ordinance. Uplighting is one way to do it. We have a lot of businesses that have done uplighting of signs. So you put a sign out there and shine a bulb on it. But you can do that with shielding in a way that creates a certain aesthetic. And so one of the things that we've heard about is dark sky policy. Well, what does that? How can you enforce that? Somebody holds up a bulb on the end of a pole, that light goes everywhere. But there are ways to maybe be able to address it. So we will have to think about any policies have to be practical and feasible, and in order to be something that's implemented.
All right, any more from the committee? Any comments?
I have a comment on what we're talking about, it's a different subject.
Oh, no, we can't do that.
One of the things is, Akeem was asking us to get historical information, and I did make a post on Facebook, and there's a lot of information on there that we have to get filled off there. But one thing that came up is they were saying that they really would like to have, when I say they, the citizens were saying that they'd like to have somebody on this committee that's been from this area, kind of born and raised. And I know you had at some point said that you would maybe add somebody, so I thought maybe that would be a good addition.
Yeah, I think I indicated we're going to go back out for a call for expressions of interest, and maybe we can find somebody that might fit that bill. But the work is going to get a little bit busier here, and we need to probably make sure that we've got a couple more members, and we could make sure that we've got all the different perspectives reflected. So citizens, importantly.
I guess that's it.
Good. John? We're good. Richard? Good. Katie?
I'm good.
Any comments? Logan?
No.
All right. We'll open it up to the community. Want to make sure all hearts and minds are clear. Come to the microphone. State your name.
So this is more for the mayor. Jeff Riddle from Myers Road. Is it this group or is it the planning commission? Who's is supposed to be doing the survey of, you got B1 zoning, we're in B1, but we have a house. There's 12 people around us. We're all B1, but there's houses on it. Is that going to be captured somewhere in the community plan? Because the planning guy, that was confused, right, Pat?
Absolutely.
So I just want to be sure somebody's doing it, because I think that's good information.
Yeah.
And then so you can assure the people like us that don't want to be a business, don't want our house to burn down, and then can't build it back. So somebody clear all of that up
Yeah.
in one of these groups, or I'll be glad to help volunteer and go out and take my bike and something.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's a good question. Let me take a stab at it. Because it's a multifaceted question, it might take a little bit longer to answer. But let me explain what this group does versus the Planning Commission versus Board of Commissioners.
And one other thing I'd say is, you said, and I think Kelsey said, a couple of times that one of the visions, you want to be able to do whatever you need to do to make, to encourage more full-time versus people that are half-time, rent their house out for the other half. So somewhere in the community plan, the vision statement I think was great. Somewhere maybe that, and it's probably there, you just have to interpret it, but since both of you said it at different meetings, I thought that was pretty clear that that's at least a commissioner vision.
Yeah, I'm happy to address that one too. Thanks, Jeff. So the charge for this group, the Community Plan Advisory Committee, is to update the Land Use and Transportation Plan. Land Use and Transportation Plan is sort of the biggest picture. It doesn't have all the granularity of the subdivision regulations, the zoning ordinance, and things like that. So this is the big picture of what we want our community to look like. What are those things that we have to consider? Now that becomes translated into the actual regulations. Part of this implementation plan, Chapter 6, is who's responsible. So if you look at the current document, almost in every case, the Planning Commission is responsible. Okay? Because the Planning Commission is responsible for planning. All right? And so the way planning is implemented is through ordinances. And so those ordinances, are subdivision, zoning ordinance, and things like that. So they will take this document and translate it into those practical things that when somebody comes to develop, they will have to meet. And so that's the role of the Planning Commission. The Board of Commissioners also has a role in that, and they are the ones that set the overall policies. And so there are some things that don't really necessarily fit into the scope of a zoning ordinance or a subdivision regulation, but are broader goals for the city. And so I'm trying to think of an example. Emergency preparedness. I talked about wildfires tonight. Wildfires cause you to think about planning and things, and some of that planning gets translated into zoning regulations. How do you build things and setbacks and things like that? But in terms of emergency preparedness and response, if this place floods, how are we going to get everybody out of here? Or for people that can't get out, how are they going to deal with that? Board of Commissioners will deal with things like that. And so we're the ones that help put in place those broader policies that will also be impacted here. You asked about full-time residents, and I've said this a few times. If we lose the balance, and we might, some communities do, Venice, Italy, one I give as an example. If you lose the balance, it becomes very difficult to ever get that back. And so it is really important to have enough proportion of full-time residents in Townsend that continue to have to experience this character, this quality of life that we have, to be able to keep it up. Now that's an arguable point. Some people will say, well, you don't need any full-time residents in town. Everybody can just be part-time. My belief is that we have to have some balance. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but part of that has to do with being able to make an affordable place to live. There are certain policies that you could develop at a high level that could then be broader implemented either by the Planning Commission or the Board of Commissioners as appropriate that would help to encourage that. And you can look at what some of those drivers are. Why don't people live here full-time? I mean, look, we know a lot of folks live here part-time. Many people live here part-time, then they come to live here full-time. I'm working somewhere else, and when I can retire, I want to come and live in Townsend, where I've spent my summers for, a good part of my life. And so, but being able to have enough of the right balance is important, and you can develop policies, not that will guarantee it, but we'll encourage it. And so my belief is there is some amount of full-time residents that are important to be able to live here in towns, and there are policies that we can take up that will help encourage that.
Anybody else? All hearts and minds are clear? Anything else from the committee? I have a motion to adjourn. Have a second? All in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thanks for coming out. 7 o'clock is commissioners meeting right here in this room.